What's the difference between the commands su-s and sudo-s? What is the difference between the two superuser commands, su-s and sudo-s? They both give a shell with access to the superuser account.
In practice, they will both make you the superuser. However, they do slightly different things, in slightly different ways. First, su switches you to a login shell, whereas sudo-s does not. In practice, this often means that your environment variables will not be switched to roots for sudo-s. Note that you can run just su to not get a login shell, or sudo I to get a login shell, not in all versions. Secondly, su and su switch to a new user by asking you to authenticate as the new user. Sudo-s and sudo I and just regular sudo foo let you run a command for which you're pre-authorized, c/etc/sudoers, possibly by asking you to confirm your current id. If you want to be really cute, you can also run sudo su-, which will request to log in as root, su-, run by the root user, the sudo part. If the root user is locked, such as on Ubuntu, you will not be able to log in as root using su. In this case, you'll need to use sudo-s or sudo I.
We'll switch to a user, in this case root, and launch the shell you specify, or one of few other methods of determining the shell. This is useful if you want to use ZSH or another shell as root really quick, and for some reason you're not using sudo. Just executes a shell using sudo, which would give you a root shell. You can pass a shell to it as well. Su-s is older, much older than the sudo-s command. My guess is that the developer is trying to make it as easy as possible to switch to using sudo.
Su is a command to change to another user, either to run a shell or execute a specific command. You must authenticate as the other user. If you want to sudo root, you need the root password. Sudo is a command to execute another command, optionally a shell, as a different user. You must authenticate as your own user. Permission to use sudo, and the specific things you can do with it, are specified by an administrator in the sudoers file. If you give someone access to su, by, for example, giving them the root password, then they can do anything with it, run other commands, open a shell, change the password, log in remotely via SSH, and so on. You're essentially giving them access to the other account, with su being just one thing they can do with it. Sudo is much more fine-grained. You can grant privileges to a user, or to a group. You can allow a user or group to sudo within a certain time frame, for example Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. You can specify a specific list of commands they're allowed to run, for example only /user/local/bin/run_backup, or you can specify a specific user they're allowed to run commands as, for example www, backup, staff, etc. Besides its flexibility, sudo is a better solution in all cases, because it doesn't require access to anything the user doesn't already have. If you give someone sudo access, you can revoke it by removing their line in the sudoers file, or removing them from the sudoers group. If you delete their account, their access is gone. If you give them the root password, even assuming they don't do anything unpleasant with it, then they will know it forever. If you have multiple people who need root access for administrative tasks, this means either changing all the root passwords whenever someone leaves, or assuming that it's okay for them to have full access to your systems after you leave.
Su will ask you the root user password. Sudo will ask you your password, and you need to be cleared for sudo access to do that.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.